Hello, my name is Brooklyn Ferlita, and I am going to be discussing the desegregation crisis of New Orleans. The desegregation crisis is a major precedent that set the country down a path of change. This event spans back half a century with the start of a term separate but equal that plagued any group of people that was not white. Although this circumstance affected a nation, today we will focus on the history of segregation in the South and the impact it had on communities. Across the U.S., racial segregation has been a comfort to only one group of people. It has been ingrained in the brains and lives of white people for centuries and even today is a casualty of years of inequality. The end of the Civil War and the new amendments. The Civil War was fought over numerous reasons, but the one that is important to our story was the moral issue of slavery. It was mainly Southern states wanting enough authority to control federal laws and to expand slavery into the U.S. The North was extremely against this because they wanted to preserve free labor and civil rights for their future. When the Union and the North eventually won, President Abraham Lincoln introduced the Emancipation Proclamation, which enacted the abolishment of slavery in the United States. To ensure and guarantee this, he introduced 3 new amendments that would be added to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment, which officially abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, which provided citizenship to all slaves, and the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed them the right to vote. Although this was a major change to the freedoms of Black Americans, it was only the start to a long fight for equality among all individuals. Jim Crow laws and Plessy versus Ferguson. Although slavery had officially been abolished in the U.S., people did not accept change immediately or even at all. Southern states especially found loopholes to fight against equality, and thus Jim Crow laws were created. Legislators then segregated everything from schools to cemeteries. In New Orleans of 1894, intermarriage between white people and people of color was prohibited. Streetcars, one of the most famous ways of travel in New Orleans, faced imprisonment and fines if they did not comply with the separation of races. In 1908, it becomes illegal for whites and blacks to buy and or drink alcohol on the same premises. So, from the end of 1800 to middle of 1950s, Southern states segregated all aspects of a functioning community, from healthcare to adoptions, education to housing, and imprisonment to employment was all segregated. In 1890, the Louisiana legislature passed the Streetcar Act, which enforced the segregation of railroad passengers. On June 7th of 1892, Homer Plessy boarded a white-only section of a Louisiana railroad. Plessy was only 1/8 black and had a lighter complexion and was only arrested when he identified himself as black. The Citizens Committee at the time had planned this and knew the case would be taken to the Supreme Court, where they could then argue the Separate Car Act directly violated the 13th and 14th Amendment. However, in 1896, the Supreme Court denied Plessy's challenge, and although nothing would begin to change until 1954, this did usher in a new era of people with new beliefs. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP. In the early 1900s, many people were against the freedom of slaves, and gruesome groups like the KKK were formed. They committed horrific atrocities against Black Americans, and in particular, a lynching in 1908 rocked an entire city into action. Appalled by the ongoing violence, both white and black liberals alike called for racial justice, and on February 12th of 1909, the nation's most widely recognized civil rights organization was created and is today known as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Linda and Terry Lynn Brown. Linda Brown was born in 1943 in Topeka, Kansas. Although she grew up in a diverse neighborhood, because of the segregation of her school, she had to walk over railroad tracks and catch a bus to a black-only school, even though there was a white school that resided 4 blocks away from her home. In 1950, the NAACP asked Brown's family to participate in their next plan for change. Linda's father enrolled her in an all-white school, knowing what the outcome would be and knowing that she would be denied. They were one of the 13 families the NAACP had organized to file a lawsuit and go back to the Supreme Court. Linda Brown's family name is where we get Brown versus the Board of Education. During Brown versus the Board of Education, the lead attorney appointed to the case was Thurgood Marshall. He had the same goal as Plessy versus Ferguson. Marshall argued the legal issues of separate but equal and brought forward that separate education for black and white students was inherently unequal and a direct violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Marshall eventually won when the Supreme Court voted in his favor, and in 1955 the Supreme Court orders desegregation with deliberate speed. After Brown versus the Board of Education, Ruby Bridges becomes one of the first black students to attend an all-white public school in New Orleans. However, the Orleans Parish School Board did everything in their power to postpone desegregation. They even threatened to close down all schools before they would desegregate. However, Judge J. Skelly Wright threatened to imprison anyone attempting to avoid the law. They eventually obliged, but did not make it easy at all. Black students were required to pass IQ tests, and the families underwent extensive background checks. White students who attended black schools did not have to jump through the same hoops, not nearly close. Bridges and the other students were set to begin attendance in September, but had to postpone to November due to many protests. When the students finally entered the school, chaos erupted. Pro-segregation parents boycotted schools and bullied anyone sympathetic to integration. For the rest of the school year, Ruby Bridges required federal marshals to escort her through school to keep her safe. From the second colonizers stepped off the boat and started building the land of the free, anyone of a different race from white has been fighting a constant battle. It may seem like such a long time ago, but it is so important to remember history and ensure our future generations experience true freedom and equality. While researching this topic, I came across a fact that I was so ignorant to, and it truly changed the axis that my world rotated on a bit. The last school to desegregate didn't do so until 2014, and this was only 10 years ago.